Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you for stopping by. I'd like to put up a photograph of my Hannah about 2 years ago when she was running on the beach with a frisbee in Galukinondo. We're going down there over Christmas. Dad's pretty worried about it, but I think it's sometimes over-exaggerated. But we're looking forward to being there tremendously. And the last time we were down there, I wasn't able to take her, but we went. I'm going to take her this time. We met dolphins on the way to Wasini Island, and I've got a little video. Just have a look. It's really a very extraordinary experience. I go to Rumi today. Stop acting so small. You are the universe in ecstatic motion. My soul is from elsewhere, I'm sure of that, and I intend to end up there. We come spinning out of nothingness, scattering stars like dust. That's my favorite. I used to trade the oil market a great deal, and during that time it was the Gulf War, and I read some books by a chap called Aburish, and then I wrote to him and the fascinating insights into the Middle East. And during that time when I was trading a lot of oil, if there was a big event, of which there was one nearly every day, and I wanted to get a clear view as to whether it was something that could impact the price of oil, I would call upside, and he'd always take my call. And he's very fond of quoting the remark Time magazine's Wilton Wynne made about Miles Copeland. Miles is the only man who ever used the CIA for cover. I went to visit Said in Nice, an extraordinary fellow who would always be on the phone. And when we were, he kept me up because it was just unstoppable. The insights he had, you know there's a narrative and then there's a sub-narrative. And he was immersed in that sub-narrative. I like this Bloomberg article, Holiday Spirits Build the Perfect Home Bar for 2015. And the description of this gin sounded good. Monkey 47 gin. The gin is so lush, refreshing, and packed with botanicals, you may be tempted to splash it on your wrists between sips. I was, and to be honest, the results weren't bad at all. Made from a base of molasses alcohol and perfumed with lavender and lingonberries, it's a very German take on gin. Delicious, cold and neat. And then this one, Del Maguey, single village Tobala mezcal made from Tobala agave hearts. This exquisite mezcal is an endless, complicated kiss of salt and smoke, a rich and fruity mouthful of deliciousness that you'll be dreaming about for ages. If you need something special for an agave lover or convince some poor soul that mezcal is truly grand, this is your buy. Political reflections, Iran nuclear talks, time is not on his side, is the headline in The Economist. When President Hassan Rouhani spoke on Iranian state television on November the 24th, he did not give the momentous news many had hoped to hear. There was no nuclear deal with America, and therefore no lifting of debilitating economic sanctions. And I said, if it is to be Cold War 2.0 with Russia, then Europe will need Iranian energy as a replacement for Russian energy. However, the price of this new 21st century cyber and currency warfare, which President Obama has turned out to be a very skilled, subtle, but real hard-nosed exponent, means the game of brinkmanship is one of diminishing returns for the supreme leader. It will require the US president to carry this rapprochement over the line, and he is on the timeline. Another attack took place, this time on the key Jalalabad to Kabul highway connecting foreign compounds outside the capital with downtown Kabul. At least 6 people, including a British embassy guard, were killed on Thursday when the Taliban launched a devastating suicide attack on a British diplomatic convoy near the Afghan capital Kabul in a day of mayhem. that also saw gunfire in the city. My conclusions are that the Taliban are apparently surging, and I wonder where the Mullah Omar is. And Mullah Omar said famously, "I'm considering two promises. One is the promise of Allah, the other of Bush. The promise of Allah is that my land is vast. The promise of Bush is that there is no place on earth where I can hide, that he won't find me. We shall see which promise is fulfilled." I like this photograph of Kim Jong-un visiting the Sinchon Museum of United States war atrocities in a photograph released this week. Seamus O'Milne, who writes for The Guardian, says the war on terror has spawned a terror from the start, fomenting community divisions and curtailing freedoms everywhere. That's true for those states that launched it, as well as those on the receiving end. Global Research have come up with an interview with Vladimir Putin, and there were a number of interesting points. It's a long interview, it's the transcript. And this comment I found interesting. We have witnessed 2 waves of NATO expansion since 2001. If I remember correctly, 7 countries, Slovenia, Slovakia, Bulgaria, Romania, and 3 Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, joined NATO in 2004. 2 more countries joined in 2009. Those were significant geopolitical game changers. Furthermore, the number of military bases is growing. Does Russia have military bases around the world? NATO and the United States have military bases scattered all over the globe, including in areas close to our borders, and their number is growing. And that's the point. Business Week have some terrific photos from Ferguson, 24 hours in Ferguson. That link is on Rich Wrap-Ups. Coming to the currency markets, Euro 124.48. We were above 125 not too long ago. Come back down. Dollar index 88.13. Japanese yen 118.30. Approaching a 7-year low of 118.98 reached last week. Swissy 0.9656. Pound above 157, 157.10. Aussie 0.8490. Indian rupee 61.90. South Korean won 11.0645. The Rial 253.05. Egyptian pound 715.02, and the South African rand 11.006. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index. You know, I think it's going a lot higher in 2015. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the euro dollar at 124.48. My target is parity in 2015. Expectations are that European inflation slowed to 0.3% this month, and that would match the rate in August and September, which was the lowest since October 2009. And on the 29th of September, I said inflation in the Eurozone, which has its nose barely above zero at 0.4%, could go negative in the next 12 months. And I think essentially the oil price is telling us that that's what's going to happen. In my opinion, any nascent recovery in Europe was nipped in the bud because of Ukraine-related contagion. Inflation, as I said, just repeated it, I think it can go negative. In Japan, 2-year JGBs traded at a yield of minus 0.005%. And that's the first time Japanese yields have gone negative. But one day I'll tell you a story about negative yields that happened to us on the repo market. And we had to end up paying something like minus 20%. Commodity markets, now this is where all the drama was yesterday. WTI dropped 6.3%, extending this year's slump to 30%. Futures declined $4.64 to $69.05. Put up a photograph of Ali Al-Naimi, Saudi Arabia's oil minister. I will take you back to the 13th of October when I said the conditions are optimal for a complete washout. A blow-off bottom was a more earthy description in my time, and my prediction was $50 a barrel. Crude oil, when I walked in this morning, was just below 69. It's now at $68.25. I'll put up a 5-day chart. Go back to the 13th of October. I said the US administration has turned price slasher. And like in Alfred Hitchcock's totemic movie Psycho, oil has been sliced up real good. I said the US has flooded the oil market and the commodity is now a geopolitical spear. Talking about US oil production above 9 million barrels a day, highest level in weekly data from the EIA going back to 1983. Again, going back to the 13th of October, I said it is the US that is now the new price setter for the oil markets, and this is a deep and important geopolitical development. And then somebody on Bloomberg today saying the change is that it's no longer Saudi Arabia and OPEC that are going to be managing the supply side of the market. That is so fundamental, it is hard to overstate. I'll put up a 1-year chart as well. And then there's an interesting article in Reuters about how falling oil prices are dealing a bigger blow to Africa than Ebola. Highest profile victim so far has been Africa's top producer, Nigeria, which was forced to devalue its naira currency by 8% this week after the central bank admitted dwindling reserves were making it hard to defend it. In dollar terms, the devaluation knocked $40 billion off the value of the Nigerian economy, considerably more than the $32 billion worst-case scenario the World Bank projected in October for Ebola. After the Nigerian devaluation and a 100 basis point rate hike in interest rates, the naira came under more pressure, trading at a record low of 178.85. In Angola, the kwanza has shed more than 3% since September, that's not very much, hitting record lows on an almost daily basis, amid concerns about the state of government finances. A year ago, Luanda was projecting growth of 8.8% with a fiscal deficit of 5% of GDP as it poured cash into reconstruction from the long civil war that ended in 2002. Interesting, now I was at lunch with some folks from the South Sudan. If you think of 3 parties, there is Salva, there is Garang's widow and her team, and Riek Machar. And one of the folks I was dealing with were in one of those 3 groups. Extremely key to that group, and then the future of South Sudan. And I was saying, if you look at first of all, the collapse in the number of barrels, and you look at the price, and there must be an enormous cash squeeze, and there is. And I think Angola is going to suffer, and Ghana also. Tullow, a major regional player, and I'll come to them, told Reuters this month that short-term variations in oil prices would not cast a shadow over projects that may last decades. Africa Oil, which has interests in Kenya, Ethiopia, Somalia, and Mali, said this month its plans in Kenya might be brought into question if the long-term outlook saw prices dropping below $70 a barrel. Interesting times, and I think we're still headed lower in the oil markets, I'm afraid. Gold, 1184.73, I think it's going below 1,000 in 2015. Emerging markets, Dubai cures debt hangover, sealing $2.7 billion AMLAC deal. Dubai is putting the final traces of the global credit crisis behind it. The UAE Ministry of Economy said yesterday that a $2.7 billion deal to restructure the debt and finances of Sharia-compliant mortgage provider AMLAC Finance had been completed. And this is the last of Dubai's major debt negotiations. The agreement was facilitated by the recovery in Dubai's economy, which is poised to grow at the fastest pace since 2007 this year. It ends an unlucky chapter, said Richard Seagal, head of international credit strategy at Jefferies International Limited. Most of the reschedulings and debt workouts were viewed to be extremely complicated to begin with, but got much easier as time went by. AMLAC's debt restructuring ended amid a resurgent property market. Mid-range apartment prices in Dubai have risen 81% through October, since plummeting to a low in April 2011. Real estate companies are in better shape. given Dubai's property sector is doing well, given improved sentiment and the fact it's owned by Emar, they've been able to finalize the restructuring. Of course, Dubai got a $20 billion bailout from Abu Dhabi during the crisis. There's always risk when refinancing is involved, but the situation is much less binary than before. If there are difficulties now, it's all about tenors, covenants, interest margins. It's much less likely that one or another party would walk away because it's no longer a question of whether the supply of credit will be available or whether loans will be called in early anymore. In February, I wrote about Dubai and I called it the real transit state, a connection point in an interconnected century. Put up a photograph of Dubai from the sky, another photograph I took when I was visiting somebody who had an apartment in the Burj Khalifa, and finally a photograph of that Burj Khalifa. Coming to sub-Saharan Africa, going back to The Economist again, Congo's president, will he or won't he? On the streets of Kinshasa, the backfiring of an old car sounded like a gunshot. "It's Burkina," yelled a woman, referring jovially to recent riots in Burkina Faso, which led to the downfall of its president, Blaise Compaoré, after 27 years in power. Laughter erupted from the crowd around it. The second and final 5-year term of Congo's President Joseph Kabila is supposed to end in 2016, but most people think he will try to extend his stay, just as Mr. Compaoré did. That would have equally baleful consequences, says Vital Kamerhe, who finished third in the country's presidential election last time round, and plans to run again if the constitution is upheld. Burkina is a lesson for us, he says. So was Congo's own experience of a leader for life, Mobutu Sese Seko, who ruled for 32 years until 1997. By the time he was ousted, he had enriched himself but wrecked the country, now numbering 68 million people. With Mobutu in mind, Congo's constitution of 2006 was meant to heal the wounds of war and prevent the return of dictatorship. The number and length of the mandates of the president and states cannot be the object of any constitutional revision. But Mr. Kabila seems loath to say unequivocally that he will step down. Mindful of rising doubts about him in the West, Mr. Kabila may seek friends elsewhere. Dozens of contracts for oil, hydropower, farming, mining projects worth billions of dollars are in the offing. A Kabila confidant is in charge of an unaudited minerals for infrastructure deal with China that includes $3 billion meant for roads and hospitals. South Africa is keen to clinch a hydroelectric deal worth $12 billion to provide power from the Congo River. Angola wants an agreement over oil off the coastline it shares with Congo. Such things may win friends and give Mr. Kabila and his economy some respite. They may not bolster Congo's fragile democracy. And I said, Ouagadougou emitted a powerful signal to sub-Saharan African incumbents. The preeminent point to note is that protests in Burkina Faso achieved escape velocity. President Kabila, while certainly offering better odds than President Grace Mugabe who will have the lifespan of a fly in Bob's absence, would be wise to work out an exit strategy that he owns rather than the street. And I wrote that piece in November, 10th of November, Ouagadougou's signal to sub-Saharan Africa, and I was talking about the speed with which the protests happened, and that was the escape velocity. Moving on, SAB Miller, the Coca-Cola Company, and Gutsche Family Investments are combining their soft drink bottling operations in South and East Africa to create a group with $2.9 billion in revenue across 12 fast-growing markets. South African all-share bounced 0.4%. It's up 9.298% year-to-date. Dollar rand back at 11. I'll put up a 6-month chart. I think, over time we hit to 12. Egyptian pound 7.15. Egyptian stock market up 37.946% year to date. Central bank left rates unchanged. Nigerian all share firmed up 0.35%. It's down 16.0274% year to date, and I think it's going to be supported by the cheaper naira. A northeastern Nigerian bus station blast killed 40 people. That follows on from 2 female suicide bombers killing 44 people on Tuesday in Maiduguri. The insurgency in Nigeria has spiked off the charts in 2014. My piece last weekend was Nigeria in the Eye of the Storm. That link is on the website. Ghana ticked higher. It's up 6.24% year to date. The cedi has stabilized, but it remains down 26% against the dollar year to date. I'll put up a photograph of military police in Goma, and this is the subject of a scandal of a shoot-to-kill policy. Coming to Kenya, the story at the NSE, this is what I told Duncan, is the strength in the big caps like Safaricom, which closed at a record yesterday, 1390. It's up 32.442%. in 2014. Have a look at that interview I did after the first half results with Mr. Collymore. EABL, which is another big cap, crossed 300 for the first time in 3.5 months. KCB was very strong, 50 cents off a record. It's up 22.84% year to date. Have a look at the interview I did with Joshua. I said on the 27th of October, the sharp fall in oil prices will see super petrol here below 100 shillings by year end. I think that is clearly going to happen now. On the 17th of November, I also wrote about the dwindling oil fortunes, not good for Kenya. My concern at this moment is this: we are necessarily placing a big bet on oil and gas and cementing our position as the pivot, the energy conduit and route to the sea state for this region. Now go take a look at the price of oil. It's been slammed from above $100 a barrel to below 80, below 70 now. There is an outside chance that we can break down to $50 a barrel. The share prices of the oil companies, Tullow was down 45.84%. It's barely moved since I wrote that. Africa Oil down 60.67% when I wrote this piece, now down 63.7%. Have cratered, I said. The markets are signaling loud and clear that the economics have changed, and how. Both Tullow Oil and Africa Oil are exploration companies. They find the oil and then they typically go and find a big major with deep pockets to exploit the oil. I said it is imperative we see the majors step in, otherwise the can will get kicked down the road. The consequential effects on our economy of the can being kicked down the road are not good at all, I said. Then I take you back, they recently tapped the Eurobond, and I go back to that comment in Scarface. You short a couple of million, I go on the street for you. I make a couple of moves, $1 million here, $1 million there. You've got it. And I was imagining Henry Ray Titch saying that to the president and then turning up with $750 million. And then, in May I wrote a piece, The Dashboard is Blinking Amber, and I was talking about security and social media. And I said, if you mind social media like I do, you will know that the duck suit moment in the Marx Brothers was crossed during Westgate. And in the last 24 hours, I'll just give you a selection of tweets. Anonymous Kenya. As the ICC season peaks, expect more failed false flag operations to help keep the suspects looking like they are fighting terror. And then I Am Mahia has put up Kenya government's new strategy, and it's of a bomber plane dropping hashtags. And there's a hashtag war going on: My President, My Choice versus Stop the Drunk President. Kenya shilling 90.198, Nairobi all share up 0.446% yesterday, big cap strength. It's up 19.8466% year to date. NSE 20, however, went down 0.42%. The accounts of ex-Britain bosses remain frozen. This was the issue around the partnership with Cytone Investments and real estate. They essentially nipped it in the bud, and I think for that they deserve credit at Britain. Nairobi faces glut of office space and peaking growth. I think that's quite correct, actually. I, for one, am looking for some office space now, so I hope I get a good deal. But in this report, talking about nearly 2 million square feet of oversupply. I think that might well be right. Once again, thank you for stopping by. Wish you a great weekend.